Well, by that time, several things had happened. Kurzweil relocated me back to California as they were working to integrate with Xerox, and I was asked to help integrate the the Kurzweil company technology and culture into the West Coast part of Xerox, which I did. So I moved back to California in October of 1981, and in January of 1982, through a friend, I met a woman named Karen Ashurst. Karen was in a wheelchair her whole life, but we hit it off. And the bottom line is, in November of 1982, we got married, and
Mm-hmm.
and we were married for 40 years until she passed away in
Oh, sorry.
November of 2022. But the bottom line is that when I started searching for a job, when Kurzweil, Xerox, eliminated the position, I couldn't find one. I even had a headhunter who had arranged for me to go up to interview for a job in Northern California, but he called the night before the interview and he said, "You know, I noticed you do a lot of things with blind people. That's really nice. Is there a blind person somewhere in your family?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." "You are?" "Yes, I am." "Well, we're going to have to tell the employer. They're going to probably want to cancel the interview." And I said, "Why? Nothing has changed." "Well, yes, it is. You're blind." I said, "My resume hasn't changed." Nevertheless, the interview was canceled. So in 1985, I started my own company selling PC-based computer-aided design systems to architects. A blind guy selling graphics, why not? Now, I didn't have the opportunity to run the machine because it was visual, but I learned how to run the machine so I could sit somebody down in front of it when salespeople we hired were involved with other things, and I could walk somebody through the process. The bottom line is blindness isn't the problem. It's people's attitudes about blindness as described with the doctors in the beginning and so on. But anyway, I did that for 4 years and then I went back into the workforce. And when I decided I wanted to go back into the workforce and sold the company, um, my wife and I were looking at newspapers one day and she saw a job advertisement that looked really pretty cool. And so I said to her, "Well, I'll go write a letter. Should I say in the cover letter that I'm blind?" Because that's always been a dilemma. Typically, if you send a cover letter with a resume and you say you're blind, they'll never even call you back. If you don't say that, you might get the interview, but then when you get down there, all the defenses are going to be up and they're going to go, "Well, how are you going to get to work? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that?" It doesn't matter, but that's what happens. Anyway, she said, as wives can do, "You're a dummy." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "What have you always told the people you hired?" Because I had managed and hired lots of salespeople by then. "What's the most important thing that you told people that they need to realize and recognize when they work for you?" And I said, "Well, you're ahead of me. What?" She said, "You've always said that the most important thing you learned from the Dale Carnegie sales course and that you want salespeople to understand is turn perceived liabilities into assets." What's blindness? It's a perceived liability. Well, a little light went off over my head like they do in the cartoons, and I went off and I wrote a cover letter. And here are what the last two paragraphs of the letter said. It's important in answering your question. What I said in the last two paragraphs was that the most important thing that you need to know about me when you're considering my resume is that I am blind. As a blind person, I have had to sell all of my life just to survive. I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog into public places a lot of times. We didn't have an ADA at that time, 1989. I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog on airplanes. We actually ended up having to file a lawsuit against one airline that was discriminating against me because of that. That wasn't in the letter, just that the whole concept of I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog on an airplane. I've had to convince people to let me buy a house that I could afford to do it and take my guide dog into stores and so on. In the second paragraph, so when you're considering to hire me or someone for this job, think about this. Do you want to hire somebody who just comes in for 8 or 10 hours a day and then goes home because the job is over? Or would you like to hire somebody who truly understands sales for the science and art that it is and sells 24 hours a day as a way of life? We sent that letter off, and 2 weeks later, I got a call from the company. Doug Cooper, the head of marketing down in from where we were living, about 45 miles south in Carlsbad, California. He said, "We like what you said. Come down. We want to talk with you." And while I was down there, they hired me. It was great. It was the 3rd of July and the 4th was a holiday, so you get hired and the next day's a holiday. That worked for me. But I did join them and worked in the office selling now to the East Coast because I had lived there. And so did that until 1996 when they asked me to relocate to New York to sell for the company. My wife wasn't excited about that, but we made the move. And she said, I'll do it if it's going to help get you another job and get out of this company because they're not going to handle the office well. That's what she felt. Well, there were issues, but the bottom line is I did get recruited away in 1997, and then the Quantum Corporation recruited me in 1999. Quantum was a manufacturer of the products that people use to back up their computer data over their networks to magnetic tape. And they asked if I would open an office for them in New York. And so I said, sure, looked around. And eventually the bottom line is that we opened the office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center.
This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Please subscribe on your favorite platform.